Hey everyone, Nubkeks here, and welcome back for, well, the first video of 2020 here on the channel. We're diving into another tier list for Heroes of the Storm. We're going to be looking at the bruisers of the game today, and once again, we did the tank list yesterday. We're not talking about this in terms of who is the best hero in terms of gameplay and winning you games in Storm League in this video. Instead, we're talking about which of the heroes are the best designed, which are the most fun, the most interesting, the most unique, have the most variety, and then also, conversely, which heroes have the worst design, could have been done a bit better, and have some kind of big flaws in just kind of how they play and how they fit into the game. So, without any further ado, let's dive into it. We're starting off with Artosis. I think it was the most common comment on the tanking tier list was, where's Artosis? So I do encourage you guys to do go into the game. And you know, if we jump into the game here, you can see, guys, we've got these amazing buttons up here, so you can act. This is what we're going by. Okay, we're going by the roles in the game, and you can see Artosis is indeed the first of the bruisers. So there you go. For me, actually, I've been pretty, when I've done tier lists in the past talking about how good heroes are in terms of their viability in the meta, I've usually been pretty harsh on Artosis. However, when it comes to design, I actually think Artosis is an A for me. I actually think he's really good. Now, interestingly enough, with Artosis, when he first came out, I think that he was in pretty close contention for the worst hero they ever released for Heroes of the Storm. I actually genuinely believe that. In fact, I think when they first released Artosis, it was as a co-release alongside the Legacy of the Void expansion, or yeah, I guess expansion is the right word for it, for StarCraft 2, the final major chapter of the StarCraft 2 story, which is focusing on the Protoss and on Artosis as the main character, and they released him in HOTS alongside it. I think that it was, I wonder, I don't know, this is all conjecture, but I feel like they really rushed the character design, kind of did a bad job, I'll say, and then they decided not to do that in the future again, because that was one thing I've always felt with HOTS, was that they kind of never tapped in too much to releases in their compatriot games, you know? They didn't really tie those in with major patches in WoW or what have you, not very much anyway, and I think the Artosis thing is what went wrong. Interesting enough, if you think about what are the cool things Artosis does? What's like the real flavor of his kit? And what I love about Artosis, I love the Artosis swap mechanic. I think it's so cool. Being able to use your blade dash, which you can also use for good damage. You can use it for wave clear, right? You can use it for damage in the team fight. You can use it to damage and give you resets on your trait. You know, whenever you deal damage, your trait gives you a shield when you're below a certain amount of health, and to reduce the cooldown on that, you have to attack. You have to hit people with your blade dash. Well, cool. Well, you can sacrifice that blade dash to fire off your swap and do these really long distance swaps. You can even swap people backwards and do all sorts of different things, which I think is really fun and really unique, and has that nice, I think it's a really fun trade-off, right, of sacrificing, kind of putting yourself out of position, putting yourself in a rough spot for the sake of swapping an enemy hero, and I think that's phenomenal. I really love his trait as well, just getting your shield and getting more shields for being aggressive, and for me that's really important for a bruiser character. Bruiser characters are supposed to be aggressive on the front line, kind of compared to tanks, which are more about control. Bruisers are, I think, much more about aggression, right, and going into the enemy team. And that's what Artosis does. He's got his twin strike as well, which I think is a nice, really thematic thing, which has a little dash attached to it, and that's awesome. And he also has two viable heroics, which are great as well. You've got an AoE blind, which is obviously gives you some great control and great countering to the enemy team, lets you be more aggressive, etc. Then you also have got the purifier beam, which often doesn't do very much, but it looks damn awesome, and it's just a really iconic thing to play around. So for those reasons, I think it's really good. Like I said, I don't feel necessarily the strongest hero in the game by any means, but in terms of design, he really captures the essence of a bruiser. And like I said, when he first came out though, swapping didn't exist, okay? You had blade dash, you could not do anything in your blade dash, so it was like an anti-mobility tool, right? You do your dash and then you end up back where you started, so people could just run away from you. You couldn't swap on it. His swap prism thing, I can't remember the name, used to be way slower. So you could essentially only swap with someone that was almost like touching you. Like super, super close. He had a tiny basic attack range. His twin blades attack didn't give him a little dash. Oh my god, he was just a disaster. When he first came out, he was basically just this big hunk of meat which had load of shielding, but really nothing else at all going for him. It was terrible. But then I think the rework is one of the best reworks they did, and they gave the character basically a lot more character, and I think that's awesome. And he's got some nice little talent builds as well too, which I do appreciate. So yeah, for me, I'm a big fan of Artosis actually in terms of design. Thumbs up. Next up, we have Chen. I'm not a fan of Chen. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be putting Chen into the C category, which might be a little bit controversial, shall we say. Certainly, I think historically, for most of Chen's lifespan, he was in a pretty rough spot design-wise. It was kind of, you know, Chen would just, again, much like original Artosis, he just kind of sit there and drink his brew and generate a big shield and just not take any damage from a lot of heroes. It was kind of the counterplay of interrupt the Chen to kill him, and he just sort of be there. I actually think the recent Chen rework was pretty good. I actually think it was pretty good. They made the character a lot more interesting. Now, some of the things I don't like about Chen, though. Why have I actually put him in the C tier then, if I think his recent rework was good? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, I do think that his whole brew mechanic isn't actually the most interesting. You're never really playing around your brew all that much. It's just kind of there to make you drink every now and again, which I think is okay, but it's not really that wow. It's not that flashy. And same thing with, I love the idea of soaking people in alcohol and setting, this sounds bad, don't quote this out of context, covering people in alcohol and setting them on fire is really cool and fun. Okay, yeah, all right, the police are coming. Okay, I better run, right? But I do think it's cool, and it was great in Warcraft 3. I'm not so sure that in HOTS it feels that impactful, though. It's just something that's sort of there, but it feels relatively low impact. So I would have liked to have that be a sort of more prominent aspect of his kit. I did like how they added the stagger ability, and I thought that's a really cool, interesting part of his kit. But for really, one of the big downsides, though, for me, for Chen, is I feel the idea of counterplay. Right, with Artosis, you've got counterplay. You know, you dodge that Artosis swap, and cool, he's wasted his Q and he's wasted his E ability. Awesome. Good job. You're doing great. You know, with Chen, though, and especially with his heroics, this is where I've got the biggest criticism. I think a lot of what makes Chen work is just that he dives on top of a backline character, and there's very little counterplay to what they can do. So he jumps in, does some damage, whatever. Then he pops his Storm, Earth, and Fire, which is a really cool ability. It's super iconic. It's super awesome, and I love it. I love how you now have the different abilities that you can cast. I think that's really fun. It looks great, but ultimately what it comes down to in terms of gameplay, I feel, is, well, okay, if we didn't have an interrupt for Storm, Earth, and Fire, for a lot of heroes in the game, you just have to sit there, and the Chen just dives on top of you and beats the hell out of you, and there's really nothing you can do, and that feels really bad. Same thing with the Wandering Keg, right? The barrel with a knockback. I think they probably had the initial idea of it being a sort of just a teamfight control mechanic where you kind of, knock people away and sort of disrupt the enemy team and be kind of cool and dynamic. In practice, realistically, what you're mostly going to do with it, though, is jump onto, again, a squishy hero. Just jump onto them, pop your barrel, and then just knock them into your team and maybe knock the enemy team away a little bit. But it's mostly just like a Stitches Hook kind of thing with, again, almost no counterplay. It's like, all right, either I'm playing with a healer who has cleanse and can cleanse me, and then I can escape from the barrel, or I pretty much just get knocked out of position, and you get stun locked by the knockback, which is very frustrating. Not a fan of being stun locked by knockbacks in this game at all. I feel like that's one of the worst mechanics in the game. That feels terrible. You just get stuck in that, knocks in the team, and you're dead, and you're kind of going, well, it kind of teases you with the idea that you can move and then knockback. It's just annoying. So for me, that makes Chen not a great character. I love a lot of the ideas that are in Chen's kit, and I feel like it's close to being really awesome. I do feel like Chen's in the best place he's ever been, but at the same time, I feel like so much of Chen's viability comes from this sort of uncounterable diving backline pressure that Chen has, and I think that's kind of bad. Next up, we've got Deathwing. This is a really hard one. Obviously, Deathwing's the newest character to the game. He's just arrived. He was super OP on release. He's been nerfed, but he's still OP, I would say. So it is kind of tough to get a real gauge for how good he is. I'm going to put him in the A tier for now. because I do like a lot about what Deathwing does, but I feel like there's a couple of things that are bad about his kit. I know it's kind of controversial too. Some people really don't like Deathwing and his wind-up abilities. For me, it's hard to judge again because he's OP, but I do feel like they really captured the feeling of being a massive dragon. You know, they capture the feeling of being overpowered. Is it because he is overpowered? Maybe, but you know, the big wind-ups to his abilities I think are pretty cool. You know, I love the idea that he can't be healed, but relies on these armor plates, and you can break those plates down. I think that's actually a great mechanic. That's really interesting, and it's clear, it's visual, you know what's going on. Again, there may be some balance concerns, which will pull him down. We'll see after a couple more balance patches where he ends up. Perhaps there are just some fundamental balance problems in that kit, kind of like I feel Chen's heroics have. We will see, but I do like him. I do like him. I think he's got, you know, the Flame Breath is a really iconic ability. Cataclysm, his heroic, is really iconic too. You know, flying up in the air. And again, I just love the inherent counterplay into everything he does. Like, you see him winding up the Flame Breath. Okay, we move out of the Flame Breath. You know, he's got to cancel his breath, and he's big, he's slow, he's lumbering. Awesome stuff. He flies up in the air. You know, okay, Deathwing's in the air. He's going to land in like 10 seconds or so. Okay, great. We can prepare for it. We're ready. He's missing some plates. We know we can be more aggressive. He's got full plates. He's coming in aggressive. I just love that visual aspect. I love that. I think it's awesome. One concern as well I do have is that I feel like there's a little bit of unnecessariness, I don't know if that's a word, to his two forms, right? The two Deathwing forms. They kind of feel a little bit underwhelming. I'm not sure if he particularly needed two forms. It just doesn't feel like an overly fleshed out aspect of the character. There's relatively little motivation, I feel, to flip between the two. Oftentimes it feels like you talent into one particular form and you're mostly going to play around that. Again, we'll see how balance turns out. But I feel like some of those things are a bit underwhelming again. Like, you know, if you talented to Flame Breath, you're kind of just using your Flame Breath mostly. And the other abilities are kind of just there. You don't really want to use them too much. Or if you're talenting into Destroyer form, why would you be using your Flame Breath? Or why would you be going into World Breaker form? That sort of thing is a little bit clunky, I think. But on the whole, I do like a lot of what they've done with Deathwing, and we'll see how it turns out after some balance patches. Now, I'm going to really offend and shock you, probably, because I'm going to take Dehaka. I'm going to put Dehaka into the D tier. Oh, boy. D for Dehaka, and in he goes to the D tier. That's right. So, I think this will probably shock a lot of people, but when I sat down and I was thinking about this, I looked at Dehaka. I said to myself, this hero is really boring. This is such a missed opportunity when you consider the idea of like a primal Zerg who's like feeding off of people's essence, like adapting at a rapid pace, you know, this evolution gone crazy, and like this really like feral, this super competitive natural selection, survival of the fittest type of character. And then you come and you look at Dehaka. I just don't feel like you really have anything of that going with the character. You know, if ever there was a character that could have cool and interesting talent choices that would tailor them to the particular game, it would be Dehaka. But then you look at him and what you have, you've got things like 20% or something extra range on your tongue grab. Okay, I guess. Like, that's kind of exciting. Or you can burrow around a little bit when you're burrowed. It's one of the more interesting talents. You can move a bit while you're underground. All right, I guess. Yeah, there's just nothing. There's no real wow factor to it. Same thing with his basic abilities, actually. You know, he's got his tongue grab, which is sort of the, you know, slow casting, skill shot, semi-ranged tongue ability that stuns, pulls them in. It's kind of interesting. His W ability, the Dark Swarm or Primal Swarm, whatever, it's just an AoE damage. He's got a burrow where he just goes invulnerable for a little bit. It's like they're all okay components of a kit. You know, you got a little stun, some AoE damage, a burrow. They're okay, but again, nothing that really wows here. It kind of feels like a filler character. And then again, you look at his heroic abilities. You got adaptation, where you kind of just heal for damage taken. All right, it's okay, I guess. Isolation and a sort of skill shot that blinds people. But it's kind of difficult to hit. I don't know. It's just none of these things are really very spectacular. I do think that the most interesting aspect of, even if you look at his burrow, his global burrow ability, it's probably his most distinctive thing that he does, and it's pretty cool. But for the most part, all that leads to is just kind of split soaking a little bit, right? Just split soaking a bit of extra experience and then coming to join the team fight. It's rarely used for much that's very spectacular. It's just kind of there in a kind of passive, bland way. Even his trait, you know, gathering up essence. Okay, cool. What's it do? You can consume it to heal yourself a bit. So, yeah, you know, it's kind of like Muradin, but whereas Muradin was the archetype of a tank, and I thought that was kind of a nice thing to have in the game. Having those kind of boring archetype abilities on Dehaka, I feel like it just doesn't really fit. Doesn't really fit. I think the most interesting thing he does have was kind of the race car build, which is around for a little bit, where you kind of, you know, you burrow in behind someone or you come out of the bush. Basically, moving into the bushes, you talent into it to give you an even bigger movement speed bonus. You talent into having your primal swarm doing big bonus damage when you come out of a bush for a few seconds after that. I thought those things are really cool, but they never really ended up being particularly viable or interesting. I guess like any crowd control shuts him down, or there's also the fact that he's coming in at you, and aside from that movement speed coming out of the bush, he really doesn't have that much else going for him. You know, isolation is a big wind-up skill shot that's easy to dodge. The tongue is a wind-up skill shot that's kind of slow and short range. It's quite easy to dodge. He just doesn't have the same threat or same interest that someone like, you know, Muradin dwarf tossing out and giving the max, kind of that sort of feeling has to it. I feel like Dehaka doesn't have that. He just, yeah, that's my problem with Dehaka. For someone who should be interesting and about adaptation and having all these cool, different, unique options, he ends up being just a really bland hero. He's got a short range stun, does some AoE damage, he's gonna soak some XP. It's everything you want a solo laner to do, but it's just a boring hero. Sticking with the theme of the Ds then, we've got Deva, who is also going into the D tier. I like a lot of what Deva does. You know, I think her exploding mech thing is super iconic ability with big counterplay and with big moments of glory. Awesome moments too when you do get a cool mech exploding on people. I will say it tends to be a little bit inconsistent, but there you go. I like the fact that, you know, she's got her mech form and then she's got her human form. And the mech form is big and kind of slow and tanky, and her human form is a little bit faster, a little bit more nimble, has actually got pretty good damage, but it's very squishy. She's very easy to pick off. I think that sort of transforming between the two states, and again, I love that aspect of counterplay of being like, okay, Deva's just used her mech. We can finish her off now. We can kill her while she's vulnerable. But on the flip side, she's actually going to do a lot of damage to us in return. So you have to be careful about over-committing to kill her. If we commit to it too much, but we don't get the kill, she gets her mech back, we're in a lot of trouble. I love that aspect of her. I think it's really cool. Unfortunately, why Deva ends up in the D tier for me, though, despite all of that, viability is a big problem here. Viability. How does she fit into the meta game as being a bruiser, typically being this aggressive sort of solo laner? And she kind of doesn't really, you know, she's not very good in the lane, right? She's not that great at it. She's just kind of there and coming to the team fight. I think actually the core problem is when you look at Deva as the character, she actually doesn't have a lot of buttons. She doesn't have that many abilities to actually press. You think about it, as the mech, you've got your boosters, gives you a bit of speed, bit of map mobility, cool. You've got your disruption field, which is kind of underwhelming in practice, let's be real. It's a cool idea, cool concept of, project a damage reducing field onto the enemy team, but it tends to be so small and she's kind of so big and slow that it ends up being pretty underwhelming in practice. It doesn't have really those very big glory moments at all that you kind of want to see. You know, you don't even really think about counterplaying it too much. It's kind of a non-factor, really. She's got her exploding mech thing, which you charge up, and I think that is awesome. And then, well, you might have the bunny hop heroic, which is, again, pretty underwhelming heroic. But if you don't talent into that, that's literally all you've got in terms of being a mech. That's basically all she has. That's it. That's the end of the story. And again, in human form, you just shoot your little pistol and you charge up your mech again. He doesn't have any other abilities. You can talent into the pistol shot, which I think is a really cool heroic. Actually, that's quite fun. You know, it gives you a bit of long range sniping, which is cool. Helps you charge up your mech faster, which is cool. I'm a big fan of that one. I think that's awesome. But there's not that much stuff going on. I know she can get some other talents, like she can get a roll, I think at level 16 or 13, I think it's 16, she can get a roll, torpedo dash or something in pilot form. That's late in the game and you often don't even take it. It's not that good. She can get a knockback, I think at 20 in pilot form, which again is cool, but it's just not that good and it's never taken. yeah, that's just the problem with Deva. She doesn't have that many buttons. It's like, all right, if you dodge the whole mech exploding thing, it's kind of all she really does. She's just very one-dimensional, and it's just always struggled with being viable, just not really fitting into the metagame at all. And yeah, for that reason, I don't know. I just can't give Deva a good rating. I think unlike Dehaka, she's got a lot more interesting stuff in her kit, but it's just the way it comes together and the bareness of the abilities that she has makes her an underwhelming pick. Next up, we have Imperius. I'm going to put Imperius in the A tier. I was almost considering putting Imperius in the S tier. I was, because I like a lot of what Imperius does in the game. He's got applying marks with his basic abilities. You know, your Q applies one mark, your W applies another, then your E can apply another one, and your basic attacks proc that mark for bonus damage, for self-healing. That's a really fun and cool little core gameplay interaction, which has got counterplay for the enemy team. It's got play for you to work around. It's really fun and awesome. It's a nice, solid core gameplay mechanic. You know, he's got some interesting talents as well. He's got some cool stuff going on there. I like his level 7 talent tier in particular. You can get cleaving basic attacks. That's cool. You can get, you know, an exploding line when you use your W ability, which will also proc those marks that you're applying. You can get the Flash of Anger, which will do a big burst of damage when you proc a mark applied by your Q and give you a shield. I think that's awesome. That's you know, it's really great. Yeah, and I like his heroics as well. You know, Angelic Armaments, which gives you a shield, and if the shield persists, you can fire it. It's a cool skill shot. It looks awesome. It does a good chunk of damage if you hit it. It's badass. We've got the Kidnap ultimate, which is, you know, it's kind of okay. It's intriguing. It's probably, it's more interactive and it's more fun than, let's say, the Stitches hook. I dissed the Stitches hook quite a lot, and I dissed the Chen barrel in this particular video. Whereas I actually quite like the Imperius Kidnap ultimate. I feel like it has that right amount of counterplay, but it does lack maybe a little bit of the wow factor. And I also like the Artanis swap, which does have the wow factor. It has quite an even bigger amount of counterplay, I would say. So I quite like those ones. Now, why is Imperius only in the A tier though instead of S tier? I don't know. I feel like for me that he is just a great example, kind of like Artanis, of just a really good solid bruiser who kind of just does, he fits pretty much everything in the bruiser role well. He's got a lot of interesting stuff happening in his kit. He's got a few different little talent takes that are interesting. He's got good heroics, got a good base gameplay. It's just good, solid, and fun. He doesn't quite have, though, that wow factor of the S tier of being really interesting that for me would set a hero apart. But getting in the A tier is like a really good accomplishment, and I really like Imperius. You know, he's a great hero, a really good one. Just not absolutely top tier, but he's near the top with these guys too. Now, a hero that does hit S tier for me is Leoric. I think Leoric is one of the most intriguing characters in the game. I think they did a really good job with him, especially after the reworks that he got. I think they landed on a really good thing. What I love about Leoric, well, number one, he's got like a cool gameplay. Again, like Imperius, he's got that cool core gameplay loop with his mace. In fact, I remember making videos in this ages ago, before the Leoric rework, right, where they added the basic attacks where you do 2 cleaving mace swings, and then you do wham, a big overhead, like hard-hitting single target swing. And that's like it's a really fun thing that interacts with playing the minion waves. It interacts with the 1v1 in lane against the enemy hero in a really interesting way. I think it's super cool. I remember before they introduced that, talking about Leoric, and I was like, he's a big skeleton king with a giant mace, and it doesn't feel like you're a guy playing with a giant mace. And I think they did a great job with it. I think it's a really fun mechanic, the whole mace thing. I think it's great. They did a phenomenal job. It fits really well, so that gets a big thumb up from me in terms of that. I just love the rest of his kit as well, like the spooky ghost walk, wraith walk is really iconic and really interesting, how you leave your body and it's vulnerable, but you can sort of reposition as a ghost. That's got such a cool theme. I love like the spooky hand, the grabby hand. You know, it's just an element of Leoric that everybody knows about, that everybody knows to play around. You know, it's really important to dodge that grabby hand because it's going to heal him, do a lot of single target damage to me, or breaking that leash to stop the grabby hand, that sort of thing. That's such an interesting gameplay thing that goes into it as well. I think that's awesome. He also's got 2 good heroics, you know, Entomb, the most iconic and probably the most viable one overall, locking people down in the tomb. Yeah, and just the synergies that go alongside with that. It's a simple thing, but it's cool. You can wall people off, you can trap people in. I think it's pretty awesome. Or then even March of the Black King, which again, you know, can struggle to be viable sometimes, but again, it's got that really big counterplay where you really want to dodge that because it does hit pretty hard and it heals the orc for a big chunk. And landing a big March of the Black King can be very satisfying, and landing or missing it completely feels really, really bad. But I just think it's a good kit. On top of that, what I love about Leoric is he's got a phenomenal talent tree. There's so many different ways you can go with it, and I think that's great. You can talent into your grabby hand to make your grabby hand even more focused on that max percentage health, that draining single target damage, and making that good. You can build into your basic attacks and start having these basic attacks really hurt. You can build into the Wraith Walk and start like debuffing and repositioning more with Wraith Walk and making plays with that. There's just so many different sort of builds, and they're all good. They're all viable. They all have an actual relevant niche that I think that just makes the orc incredibly good. And then he's got a bunch of cool level 20s as well. You know, the Entomb silencing. It's really terrifying. Protected status is kind of interesting. It's there. He's got a very cool Burning Rage effect where when he has the grabby hand attached, he starts pulsing even extra damage. It's badass, right? He's got a bunch of cool stuff going for him. So for me, he's S tier. I even forgot one of the best things, whereas I gave out about Tyrael having a terrible trait last time. Leoric has one of the most interesting traits in the entire game, where you kill him, he stays on the field as a ghost who can move around, and you can play the game while you're dead. How cool is that? You can scout stuff out, you're slow moving, you can, again, grabby hand people to get back to life quicker, you can still slow them down with your Q ability, but you don't do any damage. I think that's so awesome that they kind of reimagine his base kit as a ghost, and it still has gameplay for you, it still has counterplay for the enemy team. I think that's phenomenal. It's really cool, and it's such a cool thematic thing. I think they really nailed the idea of what being, again, this evil, you know, death-defying skeleton king with a giant mace. You know, if you sit down and want to make a character like that, you can't do any better than the orc. I think they did a great job. So there you go. Next up, we've got Malthael. I do struggle a little bit in terms of where to place Malthael. I feel like Malthael is one of the heroes that struggle the most with the rework in terms of finding his identity. I'm kind of flitting between a B or a C tier for Malthael. I think I am actually going to put him in the C tier. So Malthael, when he first came out, was very overpowered. I'm sure most of you guys that were playing back then remember, where he's all about applying his trait, and the trait would do a lot of damage and really sort of burn people down. And I think that's the way he was designed, and I think that was a cool design, where, you know, applying this trait and this damage over time effect, max percentage health, like relatively moderate pace, wearing people down, that kind of inexorable death approaching you. I thought that was really cool. Then they reworked him. They kept nerfing it because it was overpowered, and they reworked him. And in the rework, one of the big things they gave him was a cleaving basic attack, which applied his mark, that damage over time effect, to people in a cleave around him. Had a few problems, though, I think. Well, number one, they neutered the effect of that mark so much that nowadays it really doesn't feel anywhere near as impactful as it did before. It's no longer a kind of a big impactful damage over time effect, and the talents that go with it to increase that damage also feel underwhelming. You also have his E ability, which shoots out this little misty skill shot, which applies the mark. Now, that was important when he first came out, because you couldn't cleave to apply your basic attack, so you kind of had to you had to attack each person individually to apply the mark. And I thought that was an interesting gameplay mechanic as well, and keep that mark refreshed. That was cool. That was interesting, 'cause it's all about spreading that around. But now with the cleaving thing, well, what's the point of having this sort of AoE skill shot? It feels a bit weird in his kit. It's kind of a way to engage, but a very clunky way to engage, I feel. It just doesn't feel like it has a very strong place, like it kind of did when he first came out, where, well, okay, that was a way to apply my mark to multiple people at the same time, which otherwise I can't do. Now his basic attacks do it by default. It kind of feels a bit meh. Likewise, his Tormented Souls heroic, I feel like really suffered with the rework. This is where he, again, puts this big effect around him and applies his mark to everyone around him. That's awesome, right? That was really cool when he first came out. It felt meta niche. But now it's like, well, the mark is no longer even that impactful, and I apply it in cleaving basic attacks anyway. It doesn't have that wow factor. It doesn't really feel like a very cohesive kit, I'm gonna be honest. It feels like it's a little bit lacking, a little bit disjointed, and I think that's a bit of a bummer for Malthael. Like, obviously, yeah, the Q build is cool, and the self-healing with your Q with the marks is interesting, but I just feel like a lot of the other aspects of his kit have struggled. They've kept trying to add the Wraith Strike, the teleporting with his W effects into his heroic, the Tormented Souls, to make it more relevant, etc, etc. But it just feels like, yeah, the rework slightly missed the mark, and they kind of try to make sense of the character since then, and it hasn't quite clicked. So for me, unfortunately, he does some cool things going for him, he really does, but a lot of that disjointedness makes me have to put him down into the C tier. Next up, we got Rockin Rose. I think I'm actually going to put Rockin Rose as maybe an S tier hero, because I think he is just so unique and so interesting. The ability to take over a fort is so badass. It's so eye-catching. It's a real wow moment. It's so cool. And again, it's something that both teams play around, that your team plays around, and you can build your whole even map strategy around using the Rockin Rose Molten Core to defend objectives. And the enemy team has to adjust how they play. I think that's really badass. It's really cool. It's a very awesome raid boss feeling mechanic to have in the game, and I think they knocked it out of the park with that one. At the same time, he also has two very cool heroics. Sulfurous Smash, which has real, big single target kill potential. It's a punchy, impactful ult when he uses it. Now, most of the time, of course, Ragnaroses go for Lava Wave, which is, again, a really interesting thing for, I think, a Bruiser to bring. Not a team-fighting Bruiser, like a lot of these other guys are. Not a team-fighting Bruiser, but one that's more focused on the map control, on the macro play. I think that's actually pretty damn cool, and Ragnaros does a good, iconic job of doing it. Again, like his sulfurous attacks, they feel big, they feel meaty, they feel impactful, but he's got a very clear weakness of being this very immobile and relatively vulnerable melee bruiser hero. He's not as tanky as some of the other guys. He does have that vulnerability, so I like that aspect of counterplay as well. And just sort of thinking the fiery area of effect things are built into all of his abilities. I just think it's good, it's awesome. It's iconic. He can build into his Q. He can build into his E. He can even build into his W, which isn't great, but he can do it. And for that reason, I will actually put him up in the S tier. Because, yeah, I don't know. I like what they did with him. It's very unique, and it's a different way to play, but that really fits into Heroes of the Storm. It just fits with the game. It meshes perfectly in a badass way. It never feels unfair either, which I think is important. It always feels fair playing with or against a Ragnaros, and I think that's good. I think it's important. Next up, we have Rexxar. Rexxar, arguably, I think, could go into the S tier. For me, I'm going to put him in the A tier. I'm going to put him just a bit below the S tier there. I think a lot of what Rexxar does is cool. Controlling Misha, it's a really interesting mechanic. It's really badass. Now, the one thing I don't like about Rexxar is that I feel that they went a bit too far in terms of Misha being good and not far enough in making Rexxar himself be good. I feel like Rexxar struggles a little bit. There's a little bit of a downside there of feeling like it's more so about the Misha, and Rexxar is more of a mobile respawn point for the Misha. I would have liked it if the Rexxar himself was more of a threat, and Misha, it was more about being the Beastmaster instead of like the Beast respawn marker, if you get what I mean. Maybe a little bit more focused on summoning, a bit more focused on Rexxar himself doing damage, and Misha being more about, being there for crowd control and being a big bonus, a noticeable bonus, but not being kind of the defining thing about him. It's just sort of a thematic design choice, right? I respect what they did with it. I think it's great. But for me, I would have liked that balance to be a little bit different. I do think he has some kind of interesting stuff going on with like aspect of the Hawk and that sort of stuff with those talents, the talents into Rexxar basic attacks, but it just doesn't go far enough for me. So for that reason, I put him as A because I think it's a cool mechanic, but I would have liked to have a bit more focus on the man himself, the half orc, half ogre behind the bear. So there you go. Next up, we have another S tier hero for me. It's Sonya. S for Sonya, S for S tier. I'm a big fan of Sonya. I think Sonya is phenomenal, actually. When I was sitting down and I was thinking about this list, Sonya was actually the first one that jumped out at me as being like, you know what, actually, I really like her design. I think it's super good. She is kind of the archetype of a, like Muradin was the archetype of a tank for me. Sonya is the archetype of a bruiser. Just super aggressive, super all in, tanky, but needs to go all in. Needs to commit to the fight, you know. She is a berserker. She's all about going crazy in there. I think she's got one of the best and most interesting resource systems in the game, right? She generates fury by going in with her spear, hitting her Q. So it's a skill shot. You've got that skill aspect to it. You can hit that, you go in. You're already committed to the fight, but you generate a bunch of fury. And then you generate more by hitting people with your attacks. So kind of like Artanis generating his shield, it's all about going in and going aggressive. And it's not really about backing out. That's not what a berserker's about. So that's not what she does. I think she's got 2 really cool heroics as well. You know, you got Wrath of the Berserker, which just ups her damage, halves the duration of most crowd control effects on her. What's not to love? That's super cool. You can extend that duration again by generating fury by being aggressive. Badass, awesome, super cool. You've got Leap, which is not as good in my opinion as a heroic, but it's still interesting going in. It's got that iconic ooh-ah sound effect when you go in. It's cool. It's not terrible. It's okay. It's probably the weakest part of her kit in my opinion, but it's still pretty decent. And then on top of that, you got a lot of cool different ways to build her. You can build into your Q and really emphasizing that aspect. You can build into her basic attacks, emphasize that aspect. You can build into whirlwinding and just spinning to win all the time and self-healing and doing AoE damage. You can build into your slam ability now, you know, and doing lots of good damage with those Ws, which is pretty cool. That was a weakness of her kit before her rework. The W thing was just kind of there. Now it actually feels like it kind of matters. Yeah, I just really like Sonya. I think she's great. It's all about aggression, and it just all of her kit fits together. It all synergizes. It all makes sense. And you still have that counterplay of knowing that Sonya has to go aggressive, and once she's gone in, she's kind of stuck staying in. And if you can if you can get in her way, you know, stun her out of her whirlwind, kite her back a little bit, you know that she's really going to suffer because she needs to keep going in. If you make her retreat or you make that engagement weaker by playing around it properly, that you've done a good job against her. And I think that's really cool. So yeah, big thumbs up for me on Sonya. I really think she's great. Next we have Thrall. I'm going to put Thrall in the A tier. Again, Thrall could very easily, I think, have been in the S tier for me as well. I think Thrall's really cool. I think the big thing that attracts me about Thrall is he's got 2 super iconic heroic abilities. Earthquake. Wow, that's a wow ultimate. Same thing with Sundering. That's also another wow ultimate, both providing big engage, massive team fight value. They're super cool. I also love his trait that, you know, Thrall is relatively squishy, but by hitting people with your abilities, you self-heal a lot. So it's all about managing that. I think it's interesting. And he has a really cool playstyle that plays into that too, where you can go in and, you know, beat people up with Wind Fury, do some nice damage, and then you can back out a little bit, you can poke a bit with Chain Lightning, heal yourself up again to go in again. It's kind of that back and forth. I think it's actually pretty awesome. The one thing I maybe don't like about Thrall so much is I feel like the Wind Fury builds really feel very unimpactful. It doesn't feel that good. I feel like Thrall nearly always plays pretty much the same. Like the heroic choice is important, that's impactful, but outside of that, there's not a ton of variety in how you play Thrall. And certainly in terms of, you know, when I think about the shaman fantasy, however you say it, from WoW, I think, you know, that the enhancement shaman, you're popping off with Wind Fury and doing big physical attacks. That's something I would have liked to see more in Thrall, having Wind Fury and having a lot of talents dedicated to it, but I don't think they quite succeeded. But like I said, I feel like the core gameplay of Thrall is really interesting. He's got some really big wow moments. It's cool, it's fun. He could go into the S tier for me. I think these 2 guys could go into S tier, and I wouldn't really mind. I'd actually be pretty happy with that too. But we'll put them in A tier for now. Okay, last 3 here. Let's go through a little bit faster. We got Varian. For me, I put Varian in the B tier. I do like the idea of Varian. You know, he had some troubles. He had a lot of troubles, but I think after some rework, some tweaks, Varian's in a relatively interesting place where all of his ultimate picks, as they were at level 4, feel kind of interesting. Now, of course, they came at one stage, they came at level 10, and Varian's had some rough times historically. He's had some rough times, but now we're at a point where, again, he's not the most crazy exciting hero by any means, but the fact that they now have managed to have 3 relatively viable playstyles to the hero, which are very different. You know, going the Fury build with your 2 swords, attacking very quickly, moving very quickly, very simple. That's cool. Colossus Smash, which is more about that burst pick-off damage, or then Taunt, which is about crowd control and being tanky and survivable. I think that's interesting. I think it's cool. Again, he just doesn't have that wow factor. I feel like, you know, by getting the variety of choices of how you want to build a hero, that's cool and interesting, but you also give up some more of those unique things, right? Like if you take, let's say, Illidan compared to Twin Blades Varian, Illidan has a lot more nuance and interest going on. They're similar heroes, but Illidan, by just being focused on being Illidan, kind of has more variety happening there. Or likewise with Colossus Smash, you think about maybe something like a Kerrigan. She's got a lot more interesting stuff going on with that sort of bursty melee assassin type playstyle than Varian with Colossus Smash does. So that for me is a bit of a downside. I also really love, by the way, his banners. I think they're super cool, really iconic, that fit the character too. So I think that's good. So yeah, he's a B for me. He's okay. Good variety, but not the most interesting when you look at any individual aspect. Next up, we've got Zul. Again, Zul for me is a B. I feel like Zul was most interesting when he first came out. The idea of, you know, killing minions and summoning your own, and that sort of that lane pushing summoning type of playstyle was really cool. I think that it suffered a little bit with the, you know, the changes they made to the XP system, to the laning system, to the minion system, and making that much less impactful in the game now than it used to be. Making that early game less of a big deal, I think actually hurts Zul's design quite a lot. You know, if you think about, imagine Zul back in the days of, you know, where towers had ammo and pushing down the lanes with your little summon minions, you could deplete that ammo and sort of wear people down, and it was a real threat. Whereas now, obviously, there is no ammo. You don't get that much XP for destroying structures anymore. He's kind of fallen off, and I think he kind of struggles to find an identity because of that. That being said, he is still interesting. He is still iconic. He's got a lot of cool things going for him with those summons. One problem, too, is Poison Nova as a heroic. It looks flashy, it's cool, but it struggles a lot in terms of viability, which is a little bit meh. But it's got nice stuff going with his bone armor and interesting talent choices at level 1. He's got a variety of builds with the Q build, a bit of a summoning focus build, a W build, all about those sweeping strikes. That stuff is nice, that's interesting. But yeah, I just feel that Zul fit the game better when he first came out compared to how he fits the game now. And then finally, we have Arel. And for me, Arel is going to be going into the C tier, I'm afraid. Yeah, the C tier for Arel. I think Arel had good potential. Much like Chen and Malthael, she's got good potential that's not been fully realized as a sort of supportive bruiser who is more about protecting her team than she is about being aggressive. I think that could be really cool. However, I don't feel like she's ever quite succeeded at managing to do that. She's just kind of there, and she's really difficult to kill, and she's disruptive, but it doesn't really feel like her ability to save or protect her team is that good. I think when you look at her heroics as well, I think her heroics are definitely a point of weakness in her kit. They just definitely feel underwhelming. You know, Ardent Defender, which gives you basically immunity and you heal for damage taken for 3 seconds, it's got a really long cooldown, and again, it makes her unkillable, but it feels a little bit meh. I prefer the level 20 upgrade, where you heal your allies for damage that you take. I think that's cool and that's interesting, but it's not really a thing until level 20. Likewise, I think the Holy Ground is more interesting as a heroic. I think that's got, like, it's got a cool effect, a cool idea of zone control, but yeah, just her ability to actually peel for her teammates, her ability to actually put threat out, and her ability to protect. You got cool stuff happening at level 4 with the talents, like you have Hand of Freedom, give people freedom from roots and slows, or you can heal people a bit with your spells. That's cool, but it's just not large enough an aspect of her to make her that interesting for me. I would have preferred that they moved more in that direction, be more focused on her as kind of like an Uther, if you get me, like offlane Uther, that sort of idea of being like, okay, yeah, I have a little bit of aggression, but I'm really more about supporting my team and peeling and protecting. I think that would have been cool, and it's not something she really delivers on, I think. So for me, that's a downside to Arel. And there you go, guys. That's my look at the bruisers. That's my ranking. As always, you know, let me know what you think down below. Which ones you think are the most fun to play with, to play against? Which ones you think add the most to the game? like I said, I could easily add these two guys up into S tier probably. And, you know, I think we got a lot of good bruisers in the game. I also think we got quite a few bruisers. Unlike the tanks, we got more in the C and D tier this time. But I also feel like we got more characters in the S and A tier. So it's a bit of a balance thing. I think bruisers on the whole, I think that kind of reflects the bruisers, is that you've got, you know, it's quite a split pool of, you got half of them or so are really cool and unique and fun and interesting. And then half of them are a bit meh, whereas the tanks are kind of more consistently quite good. I feel the bruisers, they're more divided, right? They're more divided. But there you go. I'll see you guys next time for another tier list. I think we'll be diving into melee assassins next time. So if we are, or maybe ranged, I think melee assassins would be good after bruiser, because there obviously is some overlap with that. See you all then, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.